Hi, I'm Asphyxia. I'm a writer and artist. I'm deaf, and I'm communicating with you through Auslan, Australian Sign Language. Our interpreter, whose voice you can hear, is Belinda Diggins. My most recent book, Future Girl, which I have here, it's recently been shortlisted for the Indie Book Award. Future Girl has been flying off the shelves since it was published late last year by Allen and Unwin. And one of the reasons is because the protagonist is deaf, and the book provides a real window into deaf experience. 9 years ago, when I first commenced writing this book, I opened up my computer to begin, and I realized that I had a problem. I had absolutely no idea how to describe what it's like to be deaf because, well, it's an ordinary part of my everyday experience. I cannot remember what it's like not to be deaf. I became deaf when I was 3, and at that time my parents would chase me around the house with my hearing aids, trying to plug them into my ears and ensure that they stayed there. I was not interested in my hearing aids at all. And in fact, I hadn't even noticed I'd become deaf. I was only interested in playing cops and robbers with my brothers and cutting the hair off my dolls to replace them with wigs. For much of my childhood, I remained disinterested in my deafness and simply coped with the challenges it posed in the same way that one copes with the annoying interruptions to life, like having to go to the toilet or brush your teeth. I realized that if I wanted to write about deafness, I was going to need to pay more attention. So I started to note down my experiences of deafness every day in my journal. Writing these things down, I was astonished by what unfolded from this process. I started to notice when hearing people would speak to me, they'd say little patronizing comments like how well I could speak, and I would experience flashes of annoyance from these experiences. Or I noticed a stranger would make a comment about why I don't get a cochlear implant, and I actually felt outrage from this. And the biggest discovery was one that shocked me. I realized that all day, every day, I was making decisions about how to respond to the world because of my deafness. And I'd never actually stopped to think about my choices. So questions were coming up for me, like, were the choices that I was making in alignment with my values? And what were my values? Should I be making different choices? I'll give you an example. So if I'm standing in a group of hearing people and they're all laughing and I have no idea what they're laughing about, should I laugh along to seem friendly? And if I do that, does that mean that I'm somehow lying and pretending that I have understood? Or should I stand there with a stony face, but at the risk of seeming rude and unfriendly? I realized that my default position was to laugh along. But was that actually helpful? It meant that people had the false impression that I had understood, and it told them from my behavior to keep going, keep joking at this speed, and there was no need to make the joke clear to me. Is that really what I wanted? The result was more exclusion and more confusion. If I changed my approach and I didn't laugh along, but instead interrupted with a question asking, what's so funny? Would that result in something better for me? So I decided to try it out. And I discovered that when people are laughing, they rarely hear the question about what's so funny. In fact, it takes quite a lot of assertiveness and stony-faced attitude in most cases to get hearing people to be inclusive and tell me the joke. But I realized that I would rather do that than to perpetuate a culture of exclusion, which was what my previous actions were doing. Another thing I discovered is that when a person has made an effort to provide access to me, I'm always effusively grateful, even if the access has failed. I'll give you an example of that. A performer invited me to her theatre show, telling me that she would book an interpreter. Now, to be honest, I didn't really want to go to the show, and I don't really like interpreted theatre. But there was this lovely woman making an effort, and I didn't want to snub her, lest it meant that the next time she wouldn't bother. So I bought a ticket and I went to the show. And when I got there, I met with the interpreter and I realized it was an old friend of mine, and we greeted each other. She told me that she was booked at the very last minute. That was strange to me because the performer had emailed me months ago. And therefore, the interpreter hadn't been able to prepare properly. And due to this lack of preparation, that meant that I couldn't understand the show at all. So there I was, sitting in the front row, smiling encouragingly at the interpreter and smiling encouragingly at the performer, and splitting my attention between the two of them, which meant that I couldn't take in what either of them was doing. And I started to feel upset and bored and annoyed and pissed off. I really, really just wanted to get up and walk out and go and do something else. But then if I did that, then what? Everyone would see that I, the only deaf person in the audience, had left. My friend, the interpreter, could feel hurt or offended, and so might the performer. So if I had left, what would the interpreter have done? Would they have continued to stand there and interpret even though there was no deaf people in the audience? And if she had stopped, it would be like making an announcement to every person who attended, the deaf person has left. It wasn't like I was an anonymous audience member who could just slink out quietly. The pressure on me was enormous. I swallowed it all down and I forced myself to stay until the end. Then I bolted. So I didn't have to talk to the interpreter, and I didn't want to make the choice between lying to her and telling her she'd done a great job or letting her know the truth that the interpreting was terrible and I didn't understand the show. And I didn't want to have to tell the performer what an abject failure her effort to include me had been and that she'd wasted her money on the interpreter. I didn't want to have those conversations. I began to see this was a habit of mine. I would thank people for their efforts and not explain why they had missed the mark, or how awkward and uncomfortable and how stressed they'd made me feel. And yet, with my silence, I was inviting them to do the same thing again next time. This was not helpful to them or to me. I began to practice articulating the truth, expressing gratitude, but also truthfulness. I confessed publicly that I hated interpreted theatre because I lacked the capacity to divide my attention between the interpreter and the performance at the same time. I noticed how I blamed myself for my lack of capacity. This is because I assumed that other deaf people loved and appreciated interpreted theatre. To my astonishment, in response to what I had said, a number of other deaf people also admitted that they hated it. And they struggled too. And here I was thinking it was just me. But instead, we were all being silently grateful for the effort of access. Anyway, after several months of writing in my daily journal, it was full of anecdotes such as the night at the theatre and various other encounters with strangers and their comments about me, or when I was trying to access buildings through intercom systems and other frustrating experiences and so on. But my writing, it was a mess. And I had to work out how to transplant the observations I'd made into the book I wanted to write. I read back over it all and made an effort to distill the anecdotes into a list of specific ideas relating to deaf experience. Some of them were simple facts, such as lip reading makes us really tired. Or when a person has their back to the light and we're trying to lip read them, it's really difficult, near impossible. And when we are talking in a group and we ask someone what they're talking about, a one-word answer such as swimming, it's not helpful, it's not useful. We need a coherent answer, a sentence with a beginning, middle, and an end. A lot of what I had written needed to be distilled into ideas and concepts, which was a much harder task. I grouped certain stories such as that hearing people love to ask us questions like, were you born deaf? And why don't you get a cochlear implant? And can you speak? Which always make me feel tired and annoyed. I looked at myself and I thought, is this a fault with me, that I should somehow be more patient? Or is it possible that it's actually the hearing people who are being rude? Well, the more I thought about it, the more I thought these things were rude. I mean, imagine if I'm sitting next to a stranger that I've just met and I said to them, why don't you get Botox? It's a really rude suggestion to talk about medical interventions for other people that you've just met. But I realize that hearing people do this to me all the time. To tell you that I was gobsmacked about my discoveries about deafness would be an understatement. I thought, how is it possible that I've gone from thinking that deafness was about as remarkable as freckles to now realizing that it posed vastly complex issues about the world we live in and how deaf people should respond to it. It occurred to me that actually us deaf people would benefit from training in deafness when we are young. We should be shown all this stuff, given the information and given the opportunity to make informed decisions about how we want to go forward. We should be taught how to ask for our access needs to be met and how to kindly call out hearing people when they are accidentally rude or exclusive or fail to provide access. Not only that, but I realized that hearing people needed some kind of deafness awareness training too. They need to learn how not to be rude, how to remember that we exist, and to provide access in an appropriate way. I began posting about this stuff online, and I was shocked that every single one of my posts went viral. It seemed that hearing people have a hunger to learn, and deaf people poured out their relief at having their experiences articulated and validated. And that's how I accidentally became a deaf activist. My daily journaling habit led to a ripple effect that went out to reach many, many people. My book, Future Girl, it's a novel about Melbourne in the future, in a time of peak oil. It's about environmental disaster and art, but it's also an act of deaf activism, which readers can relax and absorb while enjoying a novel, but also have the impact of the realities of deafness for deaf people. Deaf readers have their experiences validated, and hearing readers find their eyes open wide to the realities of deafness. That all started from my decision to keep a daily journal and my efforts to read over it and find ideas, understandings, and patterns. So how you can make use of this idea, I would like to suggest to you the value of a daily journal method. You can use this for so many things. For example, to capture minority experience. If your workplace desires to work out what's going wrong in the organisation, maybe in the home environment, you would like to understand why you and your partner are fighting all the time. Jot down incidents and encounters you have in relation to the thing you want to capture, and then search for patterns and ideas and concepts. Ask yourself, what is a solution that could solve the barriers faced? Look for the biggest and simplest solutions. When I examined my own list of deaf issues, I was able to distill it down to 4 big ideas, which hearing people could use to take action that would change our lives. I'll let you know what these ideas are. Firstly, if one person models inclusive behaviour, others will see this and they will follow. This is an example of a ripple effect in action. So be that person. Secondly, learn how to see past a person's deafness or disability. Remove the label and look at them for all of the qualities that they hold and see them for who they are. Treat them with respect. Thirdly, develop an attitude that everyone should be included. Everyone. And fourthly, when you make something, ask yourself, how will a deaf or disabled person have access to this? Like me, you can use what you discover to write a book, but you can also use it to change the world, to change an organisation, to change your relationship, to change working life. In other words, you can use it to start a huge ripple of change. So here's my tip for you. Keep a daily journal. It doesn't matter if it's in a notebook or on your phone, just do it. This step is the pebble in the lake, which causes the huge ripple of water. It has the potential to change your life and to change the world.